So first we're going to be talking about renting versus buying, and then using our rental properties as investment. So like how else can we just use housing as an addition to our portfolios? And then finally, we're going to learn about the important thing when you're thinking about renting and mortgages and stuff like that, which is loans. So to start us off, we just wanted to have a little breakout question. What do you guys think the difference would be in renting versus buying a home? Go ahead, throw out ideas. Don't be shy, not all at once.
It's not a trick question either.
Yeah.
When you buy a home, you own it. When you rent a home, you're like borrowing it from someone.
Yeah. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Renting is not as many costs of
Mm-hmm.
Buying a home is acts as an investment.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Those are all good things.
This is what-
So, first we're gonna go over the different types of real estate.
Do you want to stand up? Sure.
Oh, okay. First, I'm gonna go over here, but first there's land, and this would be undeveloped property or vacant land. And developers sometimes combine and use zones to increase the value of the land. So this might be like a field where there's nothing there yet, and sometimes it's kind of popular. It's like a company will purchase it and then make it into places where you can like put like a plot for a house. And then there's residential real estate, which would be housing for individuals and families. And the types are single family homes, apartment, condominiums, and townhouses. And then commercial real estate would be land and buildings used by businesses, which would be shopping malls, stores, office buildings, parking lots, hotels. And then industrial would be land and buildings used by industrial businesses, which would be like factories, warehouses, and transportation. So buying a house, advantages and disadvantages, even though this might not be something that we're all going to be doing super soon, this might be a further down the line kind of decision, but it's a good thing to like start thinking about. So advantages would be tax deductions on mortgages up to a certain threshold. It's a long-term investment and an asset appreciating in value. You can build credit through continuous mortgage payments, and you have full control and the ability to modify the property of your own house. And then disadvantages would be that it's very costly and you need a closing payment, which is the upfront payment, and continuous mortgage payments. And then there's also the maintenance costs throughout the time of the ownership. So if something goes wrong in the house that you own, you have to fix that, or if there's any renovations that need done, those are all like out-of-pocket costs. And then not being able to sell quickly or leave, so it's a lengthy process, so like put your house up for sale, if you decide you need to move to a different city, or if you lose a job and take a job somewhere else. And so that's one of the reasons that it's probably not what college age kids are going to do, or when we first are out of college, because we'll be like moving around and switching jobs frequently. And then also just the current housing market is very uncertain. Then for renting a house, and these things also apply to apartments. So this is more what probably we will be doing soon, and right when we're out of college. So advantages would be mobility and freedom, and again, perfect for college students who will be moving jobs. It's very low maintenance. The landlord will maintain property, and if anything goes wrong, that'll be their costs, and they'll have to do those renovations. And then fewer out-of-pocket costs and cheaper monthly payments in a house, and then there's no down payment upfront. The disadvantages is that you're investing in someone else's asset, and therefore no wealth creation because the house doesn't belong to you. And there's less stability. It's a good thing you can move around a lot, but if you want to stay in one place, your lease might be up before you're ready to move, or the landlord has the power over the rent and the length of stay. So if something doesn't work out, then you're kind of out of a place to live. and then rising rents after the pandemic, which we'll touch on later, and then there's no tax deduction benefits.
Perfect. So then now we're just gonna break through sort of what do the steps look like for buying a house. I think a lot of us have maybe seen our parents go through that and seen some of these steps, but not really understanding like what does all of this put together look like. So the whole timeline will probably take about 6 months. So you really want to start thinking ahead of time if you're wanting to move into that house. Like say you are out of college, you've had a couple apartments, and now you're like, okay, I'm ready to settle down, find your life, whatever. But you can like make it quicker if you put in a really strong offer. And then your mortgage payments will start after a full month after the last day when you close. So like say you close in a random day in June, the last day of that would obviously be June, but the first mortgage payment would not be due until September. So you have a full month after the last day of that month, if that makes any sense. So basically skips a month. Anyway. So first step will be find an agent. They're always all over. I think it's pretty easy, just picking out which one works best for your lifestyle and matches up with your personality. Then you'll get pre-approved for a mortgage through your bank, or wherever you're planning on getting a mortgage loan. Then you'll probably want to make a list of some of your needs, start looking at houses. I know I love looking at Zillow just for fun. It's kind of cool. Then you can go to house viewings, make an offer on one that you like, sort of negotiate around the price that they set. Then you can get your loan approved, wait for the appraisal that will come to make sure that the house, everything's okay. Is it really up to what they're promising you? And then finally getting a home inspection. Normally that's a pretty quick process, I would say. Once you sort of like put down the offer and promised it, everything else kind of falls quickly into succession. You hope nothing goes wrong. And then you'll finally close on the house and it'll be yours. Exciting times. But I really would not stress too much about this right now, just because it's a little far away for all of us. And you also can work with your real estate agent to make sure that everything's working out how it should. So then renting is a little bit more of a unique process, something that's a lot more relevant to us. I know when I had my internship last summer, I had to start looking for apartments, and I really did not know what I was doing for the longest of times, and kind of just hoped that I was making the right choices. So I would recommend starting 1 to 2 months before you're moving out. So if you're going to be somewhere for the summer, you'll probably want to start looking as soon as possible, say like March, probably. Because if you go too early, there's a possibility that things will change around and like units will be sold off later. If you wait for too long, you won't have as many options as you would. They could also increase prices if you're really time sensitive. Also keeping in mind that rents are typically going to be more expensive in the summer and then go down in the winter. Just it's common for people to have to move around in the summer, or they want to be somewhere just for the summer with students and things like that. So if you're looking for somewhere to live J-term, I guess you could rent somewhere there. That would be cheap. But then you'll want to for sure know when you need to move in by. I think that'll be one of the first questions you get asked when you start looking at apartments is when do you need this apartment by? It just kind of helps them know when they need to, what units are available and things like that. So just kind of pick a date. If you have a job, maybe like a couple days before, a week before, however long you want to get settled into before that starts. And then keep in mind if it's peak moving season, things could be busy while you're moving in. So don't get overwhelmed with that. So then you'll want to plan your budget. Keeping in mind that you should spend no more than 50% of your after-tax income, so what you have in your pocket realistically, on all of your necessities, including rent, utilities, food, car payments, etc. I know for me that includes like shopping or going out to eat, things like that. And I think if you're working with your parents to have them help you finance a place, I think it's good to just kind of look around the whole city that you're looking in and kind of see what's a reasonable price, because like Chicago is going to be a much more expensive city to live in than Cleveland or Cincinnati might be, just because of the size of the city and things like that. So just keeping in mind that what you have in your head is a reasonable price might not be the same for the city that you're looking at. And then you'll need to check your credit score. Every single apartment does a credit check on you just because you're renting, and like Adeline mentioned, sort of they're reliant on you paying that monthly rent to get their income. So they want to make sure that you actually will pay and you're a reliable customer. And so you can improve your chances of getting the lease. If you sign with a guarantor, normally that would be like a parent if you're in our situation, or someone that makes more money than you do or has a better credit score. If you pay off some of your debt that's kind of creating credit problems, or if you want to get a roommate and have them sign, and then you just pay them. And then you can also think about what amenities are going to be important to you. So do you really care if they have a parking garage included, or is it okay if you park on the street? Do you want the gym that's included too, or are you good to go to your own private gym? Because that's what you want. So just thinking about sort of what matters to you and what you're willing to give up, and how does that factor into the price? Say like one apartment has a gym included and that's $400 extra a month, versus an apartment that doesn't, and your gym normally costs $50 a month. It might not be worth it to go for the apartment with the included gym. But maybe it costs a lot for you to park while you're going to your gym. I don't know. And so then you'll want to apply for the apartment. They all have official applications, and you'll fill out your ID, any previous rental information, employment stuff, proof of your income, and if you need a possible co-signer, their information will be included on that too. You can start touring the apartments, because normally you apply to a building and they'll give you a bunch of different options within the building. So they have different layouts, different options for like levels of, I don't really know, like flooring and how nice things are. What's it called? The like stove and yes, the appliances. And so then you can look at that, and you can think of like, I know for some of the apartments I was looking at, some of them didn't even have windows in the bedrooms, just in the living rooms. So it was like things to keep in mind like that. Is that important to you, or do you don't really care? And then you'll want to review the lease. We'll get into a little bit more detail with that in a bit, but don't be afraid to ask any questions. No question's a dumb question. They have people that's their whole job, is to help you get through this process of finding the apartment. And make sure that you understand this is like a longer term commitment, and so you are subject to this lease and they follow it pretty strictly. So just understanding what you're getting yourself into. And I will say, for all of this, I know it's also become popular to like do long-term Airbnbs where you stay there for a month plus. And so I'm not 100% familiar with how that works, but I do know that they also have you kind of sign agreements, and you sign off a bunch of stuff, right, when you agree to rent an Airbnb just in general. So I would say it still applies, all of this applies, and you'll need to be aware of that.
Do you have any questions on this process? It's kind of long.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then for the lease, things to keep in mind would be obviously the rental amount and the due date. I know I was able to negotiate a lower rent on mine, so just making sure that was consistent across all of the agreements. And that's probably a common thing that you could do if you're a good talker. Just be like, hey, I saw this apartment across the street had this price. Could you do that? And they're like, okay. And sometimes they might have a grace period too within the payments. If it's your first month and you get confused about when things are due, normally you can also work in a grace period, things like that. What does sort of the terminating or renewing policy looks like? So if you know you're gonna have to end and they don't want, whatever the situation is gonna surround that. Are there extra fees you have to pay or things like that? And if you're renewing, maybe there's savings available to you since you're a returning customer. Sometimes there's specific guest policies surrounding how long can a guest stay there before they need to start becoming like a resident on the lease, things like that. Any rules surrounding subletting. So if it's an apartment here at Miami, I know a lot of people study abroad or you study abroad, and then you want to sublet it to someone for the second semester or however long you're gone. Sometimes they're a little annoying about that and they don't want you to do that, or there's specific rules about you have to have them sign on officially and you give up that lease. So just keep in mind and ask about that if that's even something that you might want to consider. For maintenance, In Miami, I know most places fall under like one of 4 different property management companies, and they do a lot of the maintenance, but still being mindful of they might vary in how quickly the maintenance happens, the quality of it, and do they charge you for it, or is it included in sort of your rental costs? Pet policies, you obviously, if you have like an emotional support dog, those are required by law to be allowed into your apartment, but you want to get just a normal cat or something, is that allowed? And just think, these are all those things to keep in mind when they work around your personal preferences.
Or even if your apartment like has a pet policy and you don't want to like hear dogs barking and stuff like that, or have pets around, or like be stuck with a roommate with a pet. So look into that in your lease as well.
Yeah, and then finally, most places will require that you have renter's insurance. It's also just a good idea to get that in case of anything happening, because basically it's just protecting all of your stuff and your belongings inside the apartment, or wherever you're renting, from anything that might happen. So if there's a leak from your neighbors above you and it ruins like your TV or something, this is protecting against your TV and saying that it will get paid for and you're not liable to pay for the other one. So I've always had it while I've been at Miami. I think it's a good idea.
I know they require it for like their property, so like their windows or any of their stuff if it's furnished. But you can get additional like renter's insurance to cover your own stuff in case of theft or damage.
And then you just want to ensure that you're avoiding any kind of fraud and making sure that everything is pretty transparent and you're not going to be tricked into anything or paying any other fees that might be hidden, things like that. Sometimes there might be like a credit card fee that they don't tell you about up front. And that could add on, since rent is obviously a large amount of money to be paying. If they're paying like 7% of that, it's a lot more money to be paying. So just things like that to think about as you move through the lease.
And then here I just included some lease examples. I know when I was a freshman and sophomore, I'm just freshman, I think, I have never seen what an actual lease looks like, and it's kind of thick and it's a lot of like lawyer language, I want to say. But don't get intimidated. So some things that you want to look at specifically are like the agreement to the lease, your term, so how long exactly are you staying? That is going to say like what your move-in date is. So if it's not aligning with like your class schedules, that's something that you want to look at. Like your late fees or any additional rents, and they'll usually list any additional expenses that you'll need to pay, like a starting fee. Or even like the premises where it's located and what you'll have access to, and it'll list like the amenities, policies, stuff like that. But this is just like a shorter example of what it looks like.
Oh, and then the security deposit, that'll be on pretty much every lease for any kind of houses or apartments. And that's basically just you pay them a certain amount. It goes towards damages in case there are any. It's like one of their, like an insurance policy they hold for themselves. And then normally, if you don't have any damage, they'll give it back to you, or it's taken out of your rent, one of the two. So it does go towards something, but if there's a problem that happens, it'll be taken from you along with any other money that they need to cover the cost.
So another breakout question, what do you think the pros and cons are of investing in real estate specifically? Go ahead.
So real estate, I would say some of the pros would probably be your return on investment, especially if you make a rental property or if you turn around and flip it. Your return on investment is pretty high, especially with the market right now. Some cons that, at least that I know through my family and stuff like that, that my parents have an apartment building, so whenever my dad is on call constantly, any weekend and holiday, it's not really like you get a break with that if you're a landlord, but basically,
Yeah, that's great. Even if you're like a landlord, I know you have to like go in and fix and do maintenance and stuff like that.
yeah.
That's great stuff. Anyone else? Yeah, well, good job. Lovely. We'll be talking about flipping houses. Okay, awesome. So having your own rental properties. So this is kind of what we were talking about right now, which is mostly what you're thinking about when you're thinking of like, how am I investing and how am I using this as an asset? The first one would be like actually buying a home. Like that's an investment. You're putting money in and you're hoping to sell it for a bigger price. This is another way of doing that, and having your own rental property. I know that when my parents, we moved out of like my childhood home into like the home I was in high school, they're renting out the one that they like paid off their mortgage at. So I know that's pretty popular. And the pros usually are like a passive income. So you'll see a lot of like very rich, wealthy people, and they have lots of different rental properties and they're getting paid each month, or even like if they're paying off their mortgage, they're paying it off with their rental properties. Or if they've already paid off their mortgage, it's going straight into their pockets. So it's a great way of passive income that you don't need to work for it. Also, you have tax deductible expenses on these properties, I believe. So it's up to a certain amount, but you can take it off of your taxes as personal property. And then the price of house increasing, so it's pretty nice that, you know, people are interested in it. And then the cons are usually if you have the troubling tenants. I know that like one situation a couple of years back, we had tenants for like a month and then they left and they tried to rip our TV out of the wall. Like it was a whole situation. But so you can have troubling tenants and like property damage and stuff, and you are liable and you have to pay for that. And then having to pay a mortgage, whether you have tenants or not. This happened a lot with Airbnbs. So people put those rental properties out and then no one was going because of the pandemic, but they still have like 20K in mortgages that they have to pay. Like these payments don't go away. So that's one of the riskier things. And this is not something to think about too much for college students, like who's buying rental properties now, props to you, but something to think about within the future. But things that you could start investing in right now are either real estate investment groups or real estate investment trusts. And these investment groups are usually not eligible to be real estate investment trusts, which we'll talk about in a second. They're smaller mutual funds that you can own rental estates without actually having to maintain it, because a different company does that. Essentially, the company purchases like blocks or complexes, and then they open it up to investors. So you can put as much money as you're able to, and it will increase as they make a profit. Although they will have like advertising expenses, property damage, other stuff that they have to deal with. So you might not make as much money. And REITs work similarly to an ETF. Does anyone remember when we were talking about that? Exchange traded funds. So those are like groups of stocks, essentially. I think I used the dog company example. It's like a ton of different dog companies. It's all grouped under one stock, and it's a lot less volatile. So the same thing with real estate investment trusts. It works on any stock exchange, and you can type them up. I know Vanguard has one, like a real estate investment trust, bunch of properties, buy it on the stock exchange. And it's like helping to diversify your portfolio, essentially. It's a really easy way for college students to get involved in investing in real estate. And then pros and cons: allows you to invest without risk of actually owning it, and accessible to you guys. And then flipping houses is what we talked about earlier as well, which is just the process of like buying and then like furnishing and making it all nice and good and then selling it again. So the benefits are that you are your own boss. I know that my supervisor, she was an accountant this past summer in my internship, and she was flipping houses on the side, which was pretty cool. So you don't have to make it your whole job, you can do it on the side. And you can pretty much turn pretty big profits very quickly. So the average is like 62,700 in profits, which is crazy. And it's shorter term, so it's pretty good money. But the risk is that you may be paying those mortgage payments, or you may like lose money if no one is buying the houses. I would say be informed if you are going to be flipping houses. So like know the financials, know what you're getting into, have some experience, or like look up how to do renovations. You have to market the property as well, so you're kind of acting as like your own real estate agent. And the usual timeline is 4 to 8 months, but I would imagine it would also take longer.
And also another way you could get started with this, it might seem intimidating, feel like I don't have a ton of money on my own to buy a whole house that I'm not even living with. And just to like put more money into it and then sell it off and only see the profits on the end. And there's a ton of companies nowadays actually that will like give you loans just for the purpose of flipping a house. So it's not the worst thing in the world to get like started with, if you want to like do that instead of going straight into rental properties.
I'd say do your research beforehand,
Yeah.
but that's good to know. And then here's some other ways that I was just wanted to mention like offhand when I was looking it up. So they have crowdfunding opportunities. It's usually for more like accredited investors, so not as much college students, but here's some CrowdStreet or Realty Mogul, or you can even invest in like debt investments within Ground Floor. So these are some places that you're able to do those crowdfunding opportunities where you're like putting a portion into like this big complex that a company is going to have. You can do vacation rental or even rent out all or part of your home. I know it's pretty popular with college students like coming out where you buy an apartment and then you're renting it out to your roommate, so they're paying you payments and you're paying off your mortgage with that whole thing. And then house hacking, I found was pretty cool, that you owning a residential property of like 2 or 4 units and then you're living in one and renting out the rest. So it could be like a smaller scale. And that's mostly what we have talking about different ways that you can get involved. If you guys have any other options, raise your hand or any questions. Yeah. So I want to do a little breakout question first as we were doing it. So where do you guys hear about people talking about mortgages? Like what is your general knowledge on what a mortgage is? Go ahead.
They're pretty much loans that, especially when you're buying a house and you're looking into that, because obviously you're not gonna have the full max price of what
Right.
the house is. It's just not feasible at that point in time, so you put down payment down, and then the remaining amount would be your mortgage on your company, and that's where like your credit comes in and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else? Take it away.
Yeah, so exactly, mortgage is a loan that's like used for real estate and buying and maintaining houses. So basically you're putting down a down payment and then the property serves as collateral. So one thing, because it's a loan, is how to leverage a loan, and this is kind of like investing, but with real estate. So basically you're putting down, you're buying a house with debt. So you're putting X% amount down on the house and getting 100% of the house. So as time goes on, property will either appreciate or depreciate, which will affect the value of the house, like after you pay off your entire loan. So let's say that you purchase a property with 20% down payment. After a year, it appreciates by 5%. So now your house would be worth $525,000 after a year. So you're gaining that $25,000, which you didn't have prior. But this is really risky, especially when building a portfolio, if you want to get into the real estate, because say if you do lose money and it depreciates, that could really harm your portfolio. So this is refinancing. Refinancing refers to the process of revising and replacing the terms of an existing credit agreement, usually as it relates to a loan or a mortgage. So borrowers tend to refinance when interest rates fall. So rate and term refinancing is probably the most popular. It's just when after the original loan is paid, you replace it with a new loan agreement that usually has lower interest payments. So it's just getting like more of the benefit. Cashing out refinancing happens when a new loan exceeds the balance of an old loan. So the borrower will receive significant cash at closing. These typically have higher interest rates versus non-cash out refinancing. Cash in refinancing allows the borrower to pay down some portion of the loan to loan ratio for a smaller loan payment. So if you have the extra money and you want to put it in, like now, like this is refinancing is a way you can do it. And then consolidation refinancing combines a bunch of loans into one monthly payment with one servicer. Consolidating your loans makes it easier to keep track of your loans if you have more than one. Or for example, like if you have a lot of student loans, you can combine them all into one.
These are kind of complicated terms, I would say. I'm taking a real estate class. It took me a while to understand these. Are there any questions on it? No.
Types of mortgages. So we are probably going to be dealing with the top three. So conventional. This is one that's not backed by the federal government. Borrowers with good credit and stable employment that are able to make a 3% down payment can usually qualify for this. Conforming. So these are ones that are backed by the government. So they vary by geographic area. So say if you live in New York or San Francisco, these mortgages will be higher. Then we have non-conforming, which is the most common type, is jumbo loans. You typically exceed conforming loan limits. So they are riskier to the lender, as borrowers must show larger cash and have stronger credit. So with these ones that are backed by the federal government, they'll have like max limits that you can take out. So usually the conventional requires like stricter credit scores. So we'll probably be dealing with like conforming and not conforming as we go to college. Then we have Federal Housing Administration. So this loan mortgage is usually for low to moderate income buyers purchasing homes for the first time. You know, if they can't qualify for a conventional loan, this is what they'll turn to. Then we have Veteran Affairs. So U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs guarantees home buyer loans for qualified military service members, veterans, and their spouses. So borrowers can finance 100% of the loan with no required down payment. And then the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The U.S. Department of Agriculture guarantees loans to make home ownership for low-income buyers in rural areas. So, you know, it just makes it a little easier for people in low-income rural areas to put down payments.
You're most likely going to be dealing with conventional loans. And the two types are the conforming and non-conforming. I think there's a limit on conforming that you can have, so that's why people turn to non-conforming usually.
And then we have mortgage rates. So it's just the rate of interest you're charged on a mortgage. Mortgage rates are determined by the lender and vary from borrower based on their credit profile, which is so important to, you know, maintain a good credit score. So you'll have lower interest rates. Mortgages rates vary, also rise and fall.
I can walk downstairs with you and go to
Monthly
my laundry. Oh,
credit
okay.
So fixed rates are just what they sound like.
I can walk my daughter out.
The loan's life is like
She's
10
had
to
a rough
30
day.
years and it's really constant. And then adjustable rates, so.
I think it's just long.
Time for up to 10
You
years.
didn't want to do anything,
And then
and
after that, it expires and then it'll be a little different depending on the market. So although the interest rates are a little lower for adjustable rates, and it seems like that's the right option, you have to keep in mind how the market will fluctuate. And if that'll make it actually make it more than
oh my
fixed
god.
rates.
And then we just have some tips for not getting scammed because, you know, investments can be risky, especially with like real estate. So our first one is just about starter rates and housing prices. So basically there were rates that were listed as a starter rate for the first year of a mortgage that showed a lower payment, and then it significantly increased the rate. So normal Americans just cannot afford these mortgages. So make sure when you're looking at like fixable rates that you're, like adjustable rates that you're, keeping that in mind, the risk. And then with the pandemic, there have been low mortgage interest rates throughout the coronavirus pandemic, and they were a catalyst for increased housing demand. And though these prices of houses grew, the low interest rates kept monthly mortgage payments for many buyers in 2020. And as we see with like the current state, even though the fixed mortgage rate, was at a record low in August at 2.87%, it's no longer offsetting the increased prices of housing.
if buyers have hit an affordability wall. As you can see, the medium, existing home sales prices, can climbed 13.3% to $350,000 from September 2020 to September 2021. So even though mortgage rates might look like they're low, you will always want to look at, you know, the details of the lease. You want to keep the expensive home sales in mind when you're thinking about buying a house in the future.
Great. Do you guys kind of understand the concept of like what happened within the housing crisis? Yeah. Okay, great. It was more along the lines of like they were offering starter rates and bringing people in, and then they bumped up those rates so people couldn't afford their homes anymore and their mortgage payments were too big. Just like takeaways from this is that they're trying to rebuild it. The housing market right now is rebuilding from that, but still not up to what it was. And now, especially with the pandemic, it is starting to get better, but people are flocking towards the suburbs instead of the cities. So just keep in mind, like, look at what the starter rates is. It might not be what they're actually going to be in your mortgage payments. And that's why we recommend like the fixed payment mortgages, even though they might be higher, it'll be better in the long run to have it stable.
And then I will say, like, one example is I know some friends that were just looking to buy a house. They're like, okay, we're done with like renting, whatever. And then with the really high prices of all the houses right now, they were like, maybe we shouldn't. So they're waiting like another 2 years for the prices to go back down because that's what they think is gonna happen. So it's just like kind of, you can see what the market's doing when you're looking to make some of these decisions. They're big choices with your money because it's like where you're gonna live. And so just making sure that you kind of get a full picture is what I recommend. And you can always like go to a financial advisor as well, but just kind of knowing like what do you want.
And then we just wanted to say that anything at or below 3% is an excellent mortgage rate. And the lower your mortgage rate, the more money you save over the life of the loan. Like you said, fixed mortgage rates are more stable and reliable than adjustable ones. So even though a mortgage rate might be higher, it might be more reliable and stable in the long run.
And then I just wanted to pop up a amortization table. You don't have to focus on this because this is really interesting to me, probably not to you. But I wanted to show you how costly it can be in that here's the interest that you're paying each month on your mortgage, in that like when you're looking at how much the loan actually is and the amount that you're borrowing, it's not going to be the exact amount that you're paying. The percentage actually does really change that interest payment, which is the main portion that you're going to be paying and the costlier portion of your mortgage. And it should be going down each month. That's the normal, typical mortgage. There are other mortgages that you can have that it either increases or it's flat, but it should be going down. So as you're paying it off, like the interest isn't as high, but you want a smaller rate to be able to have a lesser interest rate for interest payments.
And then for out of college expenses, just like a tip is that you should not be spending 100% of your gross income or like monthly budget on rent, and you want to make sure that you take consideration additional expenses. So we'll kind of get into that. So for electricity, the average electric bill in the United States is $117.65 per month. So that's often something that you think about in terms of like using your appliances and everything. For rent, you know, it's been like increasing a lot during the pandemic. So the average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in 2020 was about $1,000 a month. And like we said, think about the housing crisis while you're thinking about, you know, renting or buying. And then you're gonna want to think about your student loans being due. You can expect to start paying back your student loans within like 6 months or like after 6 months. So keep that in mind with your monthly rent to make sure that, you know, you'll be able to pay your student loans off. And also water. can use, the average American family uses 300 gallons of water per day, and the average water bill is $70 per month. So not like a huge fee, but you would just want to keep that in mind. If that's in your contract, you pay for that. And then other unexpected financial responsibilities when you get out of college is, taking responsibility of some expenses that your parents might have been paying for you, such as like car insurance, getting off your family supplement plan, health insurance in the future. And for renting out apartments, you want to think about how much maybe like pet policy expenses are, parking, trying to think of what else. Like using a gym, anything like that. So you always want to, discuss that with the person you're, making that lease agreement with. But yeah.
It should all be in your lease agreement what you have to pay, but they'll list out like what the rent is, like a flat price of like $700, and list out what you have to pay each month. So the more that you are listed out, like water, electricity, gas, and heating, especially during the winter time, like the more that you're going to have to pay monthly payments within for rent.
And then for taking out a loan, we have some like examples of loans here. So for personal loans, we have secured and variable rate loans. The type of loan that works best for you depends on your personal credit score, how much time you might need to repay the loan if you already have, other loans such as like student ones. For secure personal loans, some banks, credit unions, and online lenders offer these loans. Where you can borrow against, collateral such as like your car, other, savings or expenses that you might have. And then we have fixed rate loans. So most personal loans carry this type of rate, which means your rate and monthly payments or installments stay the same for the life of the loan. So like we said before, those might be more reliable and stable over time. And then we have loans without collateral. For this one, you check your credit score, pay your bills on time, pay down your debt. Just make sure that, your application looks appealing when you're taking out a loan. So you don't have to put up collateral for it. And then for government loans, we have, the most common government loans are student, housing, and business loans. They can be either direct or guaranteed. Direct is when you're borrowing money directly from the government agency. And then any payment that you make back is like directly towards the government. And then guaranteed loan is when you're borrowing money from a private government approved lender. So it just, depends on where you're getting that loan from.
And so I know it was a lot of information. We could probably do like a whole part 2 of the entirety of real estate, 'cause it's a lot. But I hope we covered the basics. You guys have a better understanding of real estate. If you guys have any questions now, you can totally ask. If not, please take some pizza, 1 or 2 pieces, and have a great rest of your afternoon.